Hello, everyone. Miss Carter here for the ACT Science Prep. I'm so glad that you've joined us for this session. As you know, if you are taking the ACT test, it has 4 multiple choice sections. This will be the final multiple choice section that you will face. Your brain will be very tired by this point in the test. You'll have been testing for probably over 3 hours at this point. So using our tips and techniques for saving time and thinking on our feet, digital watch, timing ourselves and stuff will be most important in this section. Both of your schools are offering the essay portion of this test this year, so that will be our next practice session, but this is the final multiple choice session that you will be doing. Anyway, I hope that you can join us for one of our live sessions still coming up next week. We will be working on the essay portions, and then on Friday, March 31st, we will be taking a full-length practice test together, which will take 3 to 4 hours to actually complete, and then we'll grade it. And by doing that, we'll have an ACT scale score so that you will know what the ACT will be reporting to the universities that you choose to report to. And also, you'll have a scale score in your pocket to just kind of compare once you actually take that official test at your high school to kind of compare how well your practice sort of paid off, and also to get another score to compare to in case you sign up for a retest. And we'll be talking about that just a little bit today. Please feel free to contact me anytime if I can help you with anything as far as your college applications or essays go, or if you have any questions on the ACT that I haven't answered, or if there are any kind of resources that you think I could provide to you. You can always let the loft or the lodge know if you're trying to get a hold of me, or you can call the Superior Court if you prefer. All right, I am going to go ahead and share my screen now. And we're going to run over here to our presentation. All right, there we go. So as I have kind of alluded to before, the ACT test is actually one very long reading comprehension test. Some of the parts seem to go by a little more quickly than others. Time will be really critical on the reading and the science sections. Science in particular, because you're dealing with more technical information, there are a greater number of passages to read, and it's the same number of questions that you have to answer in the reading section, but you're just going to be a little bit more crunched for time on this section. So it's so important to practice this. All right, as on the reading section, you will have 35 minutes to tackle 40 questions. There are between 6 and 7 passages in each science test. There are 3 types of passages out of these 6 or 7, and they are not in the same order as they are on the reading test, so it's not predictable. As long as you are good at reading graphs, charts, tables, scientific summaries, research, and stuff like that, you should be just fine on this test. The knowledge portion of the ACT science test is actually rather low. Instead, they're asking if you can synthesize information quickly, which is something that you'll be asked to do a lot in your college courses. You can brush up on your basic scientific information. This is so useful on the ACT science portion. And we'll be talking about some of that basic science information that they will expect you to know that will sort of be embedded in the test. But mostly, if you're a really good and fast reader, you should fare just well. And again, you'll be tired by this portion of the test. I do let a lot of students know that if you're okay with a 27 as a scale score on your ACT test, you can choose one passage to completely skip and just use your letter of the day for that part of the test. So for one of the passages, and we'll talk about which one it might be best to do this on whenever we get to that in a few minutes. But if you're good with a 27, which is actually really a pretty high science score on the ACT, remember that 36 is a perfect score. You may want to choose one passage as a never passage, use your letter of the day, and therefore have a lot more time on the other sections. It is really a good idea to use that ACT scale score grid to nail down your goal score for the science section. So you can kind of tell yourself, I really want to score a 29 on the ACT science test. And in order to do that, I need to get at least 10 to 15 questions correct, more than I'm getting now. So it's really nice to have that very specific goal so you have something to work toward. Look for the topics that you know. If you're going to have later questions, always go ahead and tackle right away the ones that deal with topics that you're already aware of and that maybe you prefer. So if this is maybe genetics, botany, maybe biology is your thing, or you've taken some anatomy classes, look for those passages and go ahead and tackle those first. Always use the process of elimination. That helps a lot. A lot of times there will be things that are completely out of range that we can just completely eliminate before we get going. So look for those. And then be flexible. You do not have to do the passages in the order that they appear. You can tackle the easiest ones first and leave the harder ones for later. Okay, they are going to be looking for evidence that you can do a good job with scientific reasoning. So you're really going to be looking for trends and patterns in this section of the test. They're going to test you on your knowledge of independent and dependent variables. Remember that the independent variable affects or creates the dependent variable. And a lot of times we think that we know that, but whenever we go to face the test, it can be a little bit more tricky when we're looking at those two. And then when we're dealing with variables, oftentimes in experiments, we'll have a control group. That's the group that is not subjected to the variable, and it kind of gives you a control or a basis to compare those other experiments to. Trends, direct proportion just means as X goes up, Y goes up, or as X goes down, Y goes down at the same time. Indirect proportion, also known as inverse proportion, means that as X goes down, Y goes down, or as X decreases, Y increases. So one increases, excuse me, and the other decreases at the same time. If you see a curve on a graph, that indicates exponential change. All right, so this is just an example of an independent variable. Just to really boil it down to the most simplistic terms, it's the variable that's changed. So how much water you're giving those plants, that's the independent variable. The dependent variable is whatever is affected by the change. So if you were dealing with watering plants or something, the things that you would be looking at, what was the size of the plant that by the time you were done? How many leaves did it have? Was it living or dead? Did it thrive or did it suffer? And this is what a direct proportion graph looks like. This is, as I said, if X goes up, Y goes up. Or if X goes down, Y goes down. This is indirect or inverse proportion, the graph on the right. In other words, as X goes up, Y goes down, and that's what that curve looks like. All right, so the ACT does pull from several different categories as far as your scientific knowledge goes. Even though I said it is very basic, they will want you to know a few things about each of these topics. And I will try to actually share my screen as far as this website goes. I think it's really spectacular. They just kind of give you a quick rundown of all of these different categories. But in biology, they're wanting you to know stuff about cell biology. In other words, how is the cell formed? You need to know about the nucleus, all that kind of good stuff. There are a lot of DNA questions usually on this: RNA, ribosomes, natural selection, greenhouse gases, photosynthesis, genetics. You need to know how dominant and recessive genes are marked. They're going to assume that you have that knowledge before you tackle the questions. A little bit of chemistry is on there, just basic molecular structure, freezing and boiling point of water in Celsius, since that's what they use for scientific experiments, not Fahrenheit typically, although they may throw in a Fahrenheit graph, you never know. They want you to know the pH scale, what's the difference between acids and bases, and which are stronger depending on if you're dealing with metal or water. Molar mass concepts, how charges interact, phase changes, a little tiny bit of physics, just basic gravity questions, density questions, and kinetic and potential energy questions. If you have taken one of the physics classes at the Round Valley High School, I know that they start with physics, so you should be in good shape there. And then you'll just need basic math skills for this test. They will not let you use a calculator for the science portion of the test, so just be aware of that. And let me see if I can go ahead and possibly share my screen for this. Hopefully you're able to see this. I will double check it here in a minute, but this is the website that I'm actually using. This is Prep Scholar. They have some fantastic resources if you're looking to brush up at home a little bit more. They do kind of cover the basic science topics that you will need. And here are the main categories that we just kind of went over. And then they're going to go into greater detail: cell biology, the different parts of the cell, how they operate, animal versus plant cell structures, that kind of thing. So if you have a chance, please visit this website. It is so incredibly useful. I think it would actually give you quite a bit of information that you are going to need as you tackle this science portion of the test. All right. Okay, so how are we going to actually tackle this part of the test? We're going to do a lot of what we did in the reading section, but we're not even going to read in that sort of depth. In the reading section, we called it passage glancing, where we are looking at reading the entire first paragraph, the first and last sentences of the intervening paragraphs, and then the final paragraph as a whole. You do not need to do that on the science portion of the test. Some of the passages are incredibly long, and it will contain information that you don't even need to answer the questions. You're just going to kind of get a basic idea of what is in the passage. You're going to look at the axis labels, maybe spend 60 seconds reading it and say, okay, this topic is about dropping an item into oil versus glycerin. They're looking at rate of depth, change, speed, that kind of thing. You're going to be looking for relationships and variables, and you're going to try to find the differences whenever possible. 25% of the recent science tests on the ACT are actually just asking you questions about the differences between different experiments and the graphs and the charts. Only read closely if you can't answer a question based on the figures that are provided to you right in the charts and graphs. It's not going to be asking you for exact calculations. On the contrary, a lot of times it's going to be asking you for averages or to estimate something that would be on the graph but doesn't explicitly appear. So you're going to be looking for that. Okay, and this is an example of what that would actually look like on the test. So you're just going to say, okay, I know that this on this graph or whatever, I have brightness on the left. I have time at the bottom. I'm going from 1986 to 1994, so it's measured in years. On my graph, according to the key, I'm looking at the brightness of a particular wavelength and the number of sunspots. This is really all I kind of need to know to start tackling the questions. Unless they ask me something really specific that's in the passage, which there may be one question like that in each passage, you don't need to really read in depth the entire passage. I do like to do a lot of marking whenever I'm working my way through one of these tests. So if you have a paper test, I actually feel like you're ahead of the students that have to take the online version, but you can be marking in your test booklet. If you see a table like this, you know that it's a direct relationship. You can just go ahead and throw a couple arrows in there. When length is going up, resistance is going up, and that's what this table is showing. Or the opposite in the table below, cross-sectional area is going up and resistance is going down. Or in other words, I have an inverse relationship here and I've marked that with inverse arrows. Another wonderful tip or trick is that if there is only a pair of opposites or one pair of opposites in the answer options, a lot of times the correct answer is one of those two opposites. So a lot of times if you're using the process of elimination, you can just go ahead and look at those two opposites first and see if one of those might actually be the correct answer, and just sort of ignore the other two options until you kind of can completely eliminate that one of the two options is the answer, because often it is. And like I said, only read closely if you cannot answer the question without reading. Okay, so as I said, there are 6 to 7 passages. That always involves 3 different passage types. They're wanting you to do science, or in other words, be able to read critically and think quickly. So we have one type of passage that just deals with data representation. This is a really easy one to tackle. What all you have to really know is what is the basic topic of the tables or charts that they're asking me about. This might have something to do with temperature or speed or velocity or heat or something like that. And so it's going to be really basic information. You're just pulling it straight from the graphs or tables that they provide to you. Data representation is very simple, and you will have 2 or 3 passages like that of about 6 questions. The next type of passage is called a research summary. It's kind of the middle hardest of the 3 types of passages, and you'll have 2 or 3 of those too. They're going to have more than one experiment that you're looking at, and you're going to be asked to compare those 2 experiments. And then the final type of passage I like to refer to as fighting scientists or conflicting viewpoints. You will only have one of these on the ACT science test, and it will be the most difficult passage that you look at. Okay, so for data representation, as I said, it's the easiest. There's only one study or experiment that you're looking at, and they're going to give you the data, and you basically just have to answer the information. I would breeze through my test as soon as I opened it, find out how many passages I have, I will look for the data representation passages and I would answer those first. Next, we have the research summaries. You're given data from more than one study or experiment that you have to look at. So you're really comparing similarities and differences, and just kind of skim for those differences right from the beginning. As I said, the finding scientist or conflicting viewpoints is by far the most difficult one. Don't be thrown off by the fighting scientist's title or whatever. A lot of times it will be students comparing hypotheses. A lot of times there will be 1, 2, 3 students, 1, 2, 3 scientists or something like that. And you're going to need to skim through, do a little bit of reading on this one. As I said, the reading passage on this science one is frequently the lengthiest, and it's a little bit hard to skim on. You really need to look at each one of their experiments or hypotheses and be able to mark the similarities and differences. So if scientist 1 says that they think that there are craters on the moon because of X, scientist 2 might say, well, I agree that those craters might have been formed by X, but I also think that Y contributed to this. So there's a similarity and there's a difference between those two. And then maybe scientist 3 says, I don't even believe that there's craters on the moon. I think that those were old lakes or something. Nothing actually hit the moon, something evaporated, and maybe they completely disagree. You don't actually need to take a stand on any of those viewpoints. You just need to be able to answer what is different or similar between the 3 different experiments, passages, hypotheses. Always leave this one for the last. If you're okay with the 27 on the ACT science test, I would always say use your letter of the day for the fighting scientist passage. It is really hard to answer all of those questions in time. If you're taking a paper test, always underline their hypotheses. This is where they will have the similarities and differences, and then start to tackle the questions. All right, if you were in our in-person class right now, we would look at somebody doing a demonstration of how actually to identify these types of passages, how quickly they kind of skim through the information. They're not even taking 1 minute to kind of nail down the most important topic of the passage and kind of what the experiment or the chart is looking at, and then how to start answering those. So we would do that if you were with us in person. Don't forget to bring your digital watch. Like I said, whenever you open your ACT science test, you're going to take just like 5 or 6 seconds to look to see if you're tackling 6 passages or 7 passages, because it does vary. If there are only 6, you have about 5 minutes and 40 seconds to answer each question and kind of preview the passage. That is so little time to answer these kind of difficult questions. If there are 7, then you have only 5 minutes to answer each passage. If you are one of the schools that is taking the test online, there is a timer on your screen. It's not always the most useful timer. I like to actually hit, like my 35-minute timer for this reading and science test, so I can kind of like count down the time. And I actually have the time marked whenever we're taking a practice test together, so I can say, you should be moving on to the second passage you're tackling now. You should be moving on to the third passage that you're tackling now, just so you can have some idea of how very quickly that time goes by. Know that if you are retaking the ACT test to hopefully get a better score, which the majority of the time you will, do sign up for a paper version. You can go ahead and call that facility ahead of time, find out how they offer that test. Recent studies have shown that people that take the paper ACT test actually do score higher. And then I also wanted you to know that on the official ACT site, act.org, and you can usually just Google this, they do have practice questions and practice tests, and they have a timer on there. So you can go ahead, and because it's official ACT content, it's highly recommended. These are actual questions and tests that they've given before. But you can do the English, math, reading, and science on there with timers. It will give you a score immediately. You can kind of have an idea of what you answered incorrectly. And they also have the essay prompt if you want to go that far. It's a wonderful resource. I highly recommend that you take advantage of it before you take your ACT test on April 4th this year. And then again, if you were in person with us, we would go ahead and get into our red manuals right now. We would be tackling the science test, which begins on page 640. So if you want to go into the loft or lodge on your own time, they should have answer sheets there for you. You can just go ahead and set a timer for 35 minutes. We'll walk slowly through the first one together and make sure that we can identify the passage type that we're looking at. And I will ask students, like, is this data representation? Is this a research summary? Is this a fighting scientist? Would you tackle this first, second, or third, and so on? And then we would time ourselves for maybe the second half of the test the first day that we get together. And on the second day, we should have enough time to take 2 practice science tests, and then get that ACT scale score just to have an idea of how we would do. Well, I am so glad that you have joined us today. I really do hope to see you soon at either the Loft or Lodge, that you can join us in person. Like I said, we'll be doing science this week, but we'll be practicing our essays next week. And that's one of my favorite things to do. And the essay portion really goes very quickly too. So if you can have an idea of how to pre-plan your essay, what the ACT is looking for, and how it's a little bit different than the English papers and stuff that we typically write for our classes, I think that's really helpful. Anyway, it was so good to see you today. I thank you for joining us. Let us know if there's anything that we can do for you, and I will see you next time.